Welcome to Next Round with the Pacific Research Institute. I'm your host, Rowena Itchon. Our guest on this podcast is Norman Gonzales and Carlos Yniguez, officials from the John Adams Academy, a charter school operating in Northern California. They are joined by Lance Izumi, PRI Senior Director of Education, with Tim Anaya, PRI Senior Director of Communications, doing the interview. Our charter school experts discuss a state budget change that could eliminate funding for thousands of students attending charter schools across the state and how John Adams Academy is fighting this loss of critical funds in the courts. Thanks for joining us.
Well, Lance, Norman, and Carlos, welcome to PRI's Next Round podcast. It's great to have you all here.
Excellent. Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
it's great to be with you.
Lance, let's start with you. You know, we're so pleased to have the opportunity to discuss an issue that affects literally thousands of kids across the state. So we're hoping you could set the stage for us. Just how does the 2020-2021 state budget take away funding for kids attending charter schools like John Adams Academy? And how was this so-called fix that was passed at the end of the legislative session deficient?
Thanks, Tim. Well, so the budget for the new 2021 fiscal year froze funding for schools at their 2019-2020 level, which prevented additional state funding to go to growing schools with increased numbers of students in the fall. So this provision, contradicted court decisions and state education reforms that had required funding to follow children to the regular public or public charter school they were going to attend in the new school year. So in response, several growing charter schools filed a lawsuit, and Norman and Carlos will be discussing that throughout this podcast. In the face of this lawsuit, the Democrats in the legislature put together a fix that addressed, at least attempted to address, the legitimate complaint that the state would not fund every child. And so this fix was contained in a bill called SB 820, which passed the legislature at the end of August. And in SB 820, on first glance, it appears to fund increased numbers of students at growing schools. So the state will fund higher enrollment based on either the projected number of students in a school's own 2020-21 budget or on their actual enrollment figures as of October 1st. But here's the important point. The bill then stipulates that funding will be based on whichever figure is lower. So to understand this financial sleight of hand and how it hurts growing charter schools, think about a charter school that projects 400 new students in its 2020-2021 budget. However, on October 1st, the school actually has 500 new students. So according to SB 820, the state will not pay for the added 100 students as of October 1st because the projected number of students in the school's budget from the spring was the lower amount vis-a-vis the actual number of students that eventually enrolled on October 1st.
For Norman and Carlos, Lance and I have been so fortunate to have had the opportunity to come and visit John Adams Academy and see all the great work that you do there. But a lot of our listeners may not be familiar with your school and what you're doing. So maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about John Adams Academy and the programs that you offer your students.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. We appreciate our time here with you and the fact that you've been on the campus in order to witness exactly what it is we do. And for your listeners, we are Northern California's only tuition-free TK through 12 classical leadership education charter school. So we operate 3 locations, El Dorado Hills, Roseville, and Lincoln. So we have the 3 campuses. And really what we're doing is we're preparing future leaders and statesmen through principle-based education centered in classics and great mentors. Our scholars enjoy a classical liberal arts curriculum. And really what we try to do is we try to teach them how to think, not what to think. And our Socratic-based or discussion-based approach really allows us to take a look at primary sources and have deep, rich discussions based on character, virtue, and this idea of developing ourselves as servant leaders, or those who are going to look to take care of others first, as a means of restoring America's heritage and the great tradition we have in this country of service to others and protection of liberty.
So charter schools and really every school in California have had a difficult time adjusting to the challenges of COVID-19 and trying to uphold their mission of educating our kids. So before we get into the funding issue, could you tell us some of the other challenges that you've had during this time trying to educate our kids in these really uncertain times?
Yeah, again, these are unprecedented times, but we're very fortunate here at the Academy is that, in a sense, we were early adopters into the distance learning. We, in a sense, kind of saw the writing on the wall. And one of the advantages we have as a charter school is to be very nimble and to be very proactive when challenges are presented our way. So we actually went into distance learning a lot quicker than most schools around us. And what we found is an effectiveness in transferring our primary source-based, discussion-based model into the distance learning format. So we didn't try to necessarily get tricky or try to do other things than what we normally do in the classroom. And we were able to take those principles of reading, writing, discussing these great ideas and transfer that over to the distance learning model. So what we saw was not only an early adoption, but a true effectiveness in remaining true to our model, but also remaining true to trying to inspire young people to stay connected to their passions, the disciplines that they love, and to stay excited about learning, which, as you know, has been a challenge for many schools, especially towards the latter half of last year. Now, when you talk about the challenges of that obviously is it's more difficult. And so what we saw is that our staff and our beautiful teaching staff, our administrative staff, had to go to, of course, extra efforts in order to provide that same quality. And so, they really had to double their efforts. But once again, this is where the resilience and just the high level of teaching and academics we see at the Academy was able to transfer. And it really comes down to people who love learning, who love teaching, who love their passion and their discipline, and who were ultimately able to serve families in a very special way. And with the start of this academic year, we've been able to continue that. And once again, I think the biggest challenge for us is that it comes at a time when our families are burdened, and then also our teaching staff can be burdened by their own demands of their family life. But what we've seen again is that great resilience and part of that character that makes us uniquely American.
So adding to all of these challenges now are these very real funding problems that have been put upon schools like yours in the state budget. So talk a little bit about how this funding problem has affected John Adams Academy, both in your short and long-term financial picture, and what will the impact be on your students?
Well, Tim, that's such an important question, and I'm glad that you and Lance have given us this forum to be able to discuss the issue, because a lot of times what you have people sitting down and talking about these state budgets and policy issues, and it can be very matter of fact, right? And we can talk about impacts of budgets and dollar amounts. It's easy to talk about that and forget about the impact that this has on people's lives, right? The impact that it has on children and the families that we're trying to serve, folks that are trying to find a better education for their children. And let me answer this question first a couple ways, but first I want to say that even in the face of these unconstitutional actions by the state, by the governor and the legislature, even though this budget was such a critical mess, John Adams Academy is dedicated to serving these families that have enrolled with us. We are dedicated to serving the teaching staff and the support staff that have come to work with us to serve all this growth that we've been experiencing. So I just want to, as we talk about these huge numbers and these financial impacts, and we talk about what this budget and what SB 820 does to schools, I don't want people listening to this to go, oh gosh, does this mean John Adams Academy is going to close, or does this mean my child isn't going to get served, or what happens to me because I'm one of these new families that just enrolled? I was very impressed with our board of directors. I was very impressed with our administrators and our leadership. When this started happening, when this budget came out, SB 98, everyone was combined together in concert, united in the fact that we are here to develop servant leaders to restore America's heritage, and we were not going to let actions of the state get in the way of that, and we were going to serve our families and our staff. So I just wanted to start with that as I looked to answer your question. So Lance set it up really well when he talks about SB 98 and SB 820 and how that impacts schools. John Adams Academy has been growing every year that we've existed. We opened our first campus in Roseville in 2011. We had about 500 scholars that we enrolled at that time, and we've grown every year since. We've now opened 2 additional campuses. So we have a campus in El Dorado Hills, Lincoln, and Roseville, California. Charter schools, especially John Adams Academy, we purchase our own buildings. We get private bonds. We don't pass those on to the taxpayer. Those are all funded out of this average daily attendance revenue that we receive per pupil. And so we're already operating at a loss compared to the district public schools. And then to say that you're not going to fund our additional enrollment growth at the same time that we're already running at a 15-20% deficit because this money's going to our budget, right? I don't think most people realize that their property tax, their Melrose is going to pay for their local high school and their local elementary and middle school, but it's not going to pay for their charter school. We have every year hundreds of kids, hundreds of new families that come to us seeking a quality education that Carlos just explained to you what we offer. And so when we were looking at SB 98 coming in as a new budget and saying that the state was going to change the way that they historically have funded education in California, where the dollars follow the child to the school of their choice, and saying, no, we are not going to fund the child any longer. We are going to fund schools on some arbitrary amount. And they had said that, as of February 29th, they were no longer going to fund any growth beyond that point. Well, our Lincoln campus is a really good example of how that impacted us. So last year at Lincoln, we were a fairly new campus. We were still on portables. We were building a brand new campus. And we only had about 242 scholars enrolled in portables at this temporary location, waiting for the construction on a new building. We finished the construction this year, or at the end of this last year, ready to go for this fall. A beautiful new building, 96,000 square feet, soccer field, labs, libraries, gymnasium. It's a beautiful facility. This had been in the works before SB 98. This facility has the capacity to serve 1,500 scholars. And the state in SB 98 said, we're going to fund you for your enrollment from last year, 242 kids. And we've already enrolled at Lincoln 909 scholars for this year. So we are jumping from 242 kids to 909. That is a lot of money. And basically what that would have said is this brand new building, this brand new facility, all these teachers and support staff that you hired to serve this growth, all these families that wanted this program, state saying, sorry, we're not going to fund it. And that had the potential to close the school. And so that was not acceptable. And so our first message was, we're dedicated to these families. We're not turning anyone away. And we're going to do whatever we have to do in order to make sure that they have access to a quality education.
So for Lance, charter schools have been under attack since the beginning of the Newsom administration. As you have written about and commented on, the legislature enacted last year some of the most restrictive laws in a generation against charter schools. So what's the motivation at the state capitol behind this funding debate? Is it a continuation of the war on charter schools, or is it just another misguided policy from the legislature?
SB 820 is not just a one-off bad charter school bill. Dan Walters, who's the dean of state capitol columnists, he wrote that SB 820 was part of the teacher union drive to cripple charter schools. And so, as you alluded to, it follows on the heels of last year's union-backed AB 1505, which Governor Newsom signed, and which is perhaps the worst anti-charter school bill passed in California since charters were established back in the 1990s. Under AB 1505, local school boards can deny a charter school's petition if it finds that the proposed charter is demonstrably unlikely to serve the interests of the entire community, which is a carte blanche reason to deny any charter school petition. And this provision includes a consideration for the fiscal impact of the proposed charter school on the school district. And of course, every school board will claim that charter schools adversely impact their bottom line. Also, too, the proposed charter schools can be denied if they would, quote, substantially undermine existing services academic offerings or programmatic offerings, unquote, which is an excuse big enough for the school board to run a train through. In addition, the school boards can disapprove proposed charters if they duplicate a program currently offered within the school district. But that says nothing about whether the district is actually effectively providing that duplicated program or not. And finally, in financially troubled districts, there will be a rebuttable presumption of denial of a charter petition, even if a district's fiscal problems are the result of its own fiscal mismanagement. All of those provisions in AB 1505 taken together, with SB 820 are just a disaster for charter schools. And, it's no wonder that the Charter School Development Center, when it was commenting on AB 1505, said that it was a near catastrophic setback to California's charter school sector and will likely could sharply curtail the growth of charter schools both individually and collectively. The legislature and the governor have really put out a very difficult landscape now for charter schools to operate in this state.
So for Norman and Carlos, instead of just sitting back and taking this loss of funding on the chin, John Adams Academy is standing up and fighting back. You've actually filed a lawsuit over the state to try and get the legislature's actions reversed. So what grounds are you suing the state over, and what do you hope to achieve if the courts rule in your favor?
Yeah, Tim. So Lance, you set that up so perfectly when you talk about this funding issue being just one aspect of the attack on charter schools. I mean, ever since the Charter Schools Act was passed in 1992, every year following that, California has tried to erode away the ability for charter schools to function. And this funding issue is a critical fight to have right now. But I think every listener to this show needs to understand that public education, quality education, being able to select the school of your choice and to have the financial resources to do so. The answer isn't necessarily vouchers, but maybe it's education spending accounts or other things that provide financial ability for families to choose and actually access quality education of their choice. That is so essential because along with this funding issue is the question of freedom and autonomy. Every year, the state is attacking charter schools' ability to innovate, their ability to be free from the district system of public education, to have their own local control. And so this is just one big wake-up call for folks to say, they're not going to stop here. And once we go through this funding issue, the battle remains. We have to continually, every single one of us, do everything we can in order to stand up for our right to choose the quality education that's best for our children. And so, whether you're sitting around a dinner table or you're out with friends, inevitably somebody's always going to ask that question when you start talking politics or you start talking about issues like this. Well, why doesn't somebody do something? Well, John Adams Academy decided to do something, and we filed a lawsuit against the state of California. Now, we're not going to make any friends doing that, but we figured it needed to be done because there were some essential foundational principles that were at stake here. And as we filed this lawsuit, we were joined by 3 other charter schools throughout California, a very diverse group of plaintiffs, the Fortune Schools out of Sacramento, Voices College of Bound Academies out of the Bay Area and the Central Valley, and Sycamore Creek Community Charter School down out of Orange County. Those 3 schools joined us in this lawsuit against the state. And a number of scholars and students from these schools signed on as student plaintiffs as well. And basically, the heart of the litigation focuses on a number of claims, but the primary is that SB 98 and SB 820, this failure to fund each individual child at the school of their public school of their choice, severs and violates the constitutional right to a free and equitable public education for every child. And Lance had talked at the beginning of this program about prior court cases that had established this requirement to provide this equitable free public education and to ensure that every child receives access to this public education. Well, this funding mechanism violates the California Constitution. It also violates the Equal Protection Clause of both the U.S. and the California Constitution. We're also suing on the basis that this is an impairment of contract. Every charter school enters into a contract with their local authorizer and the state of California when they have their charter approved. It's a contractual relationship in which we say, we promise to provide this free public education and you guarantee to fund us at these rates per pupil. And they've violated that contract. There's also a violation of the due process clause that is included in this, as well as other articles within the Constitution, and also that on its face, the statutes are invalid because of their violations of the Constitution and other contractual law. So there's a number of other things, and people can go to our website at johnadamsacademy.org to access the actual litigation. We have a copy of it up there on our website for people to go on and actually read the document for themselves.
So what's been the response from the Newsom administration and Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Thurmond and state lawmakers to your lawsuit? And do you see any potential for this budget funding dispute to be resolved outside the courtroom?
Yeah, Tim. Prior to anything, I want to close the point that Norman was making, and that's to say that we have to remember that the name of the case that we filed is Samaya Atkins against the state of California, and that's important to note because when we have this discussion regarding policy and dollars, we forget behind every one of these decisions is a child and their right to accessing quality public education in an equitable manner. So I want to be very clear about that. Though I can't, comment on the litigation itself, I can tell you that there hasn't been a lot of back and forth as far as the administration is concerned or the superintendent. But I will tell you that lawmakers have been making it known publicly and even on the floor of the Capitol of the impact that their constituents are having and how this puts not only the academic institutions within their boundaries, but the families and students in jeopardy at a time when they need protection the most. And again, I want to go back to this, that we have these policy discussions, and yes, we're talking about dollars and educational issues as they relate to kind of policy and the politics behind education. But this is really about the fundamental right to choose a quality education, and that our families need protection of that right. And ultimately, when we get these questions wrong, students like Samaya Atkins are the ones who pay.
The Newsom administration has really tried to make it clear, at least they've tried to portray that SB 820 is a fix. It's a fix to this funding situation. And SB 820 is not a fix. It's only half the loaf. And so what it does is it still funds schools, and it funds them for limited growth that's planned growth, but it does not fund each child. So while the administration is out there talking about this being a fix, it's anything but. And when you hear them talking about this being a compromise, I like to know who they compromised with, because I didn't get a phone call. So who is it a compromise for and with? And this clearly is not a fix.
For Lance, we're all breathing a sigh of relief now because it's October and the legislature's out of session. But before too long, you'll see a new legislature sworn in and the 2020 legislative session beginning. So do you think this year's attack on charter school funding is the end of the story, or is there a potential, A, for a bipartisan funding fix next year, or could we see, B, further attacks on charter schools and their budgets once the legislature reconvenes?
Well, Tim, I wish I could be more optimistic, but I really do anticipate further attacks against charter schools, because why wouldn't those attacks continue? With the Democrat supermajority and a governor endorsed by the California Teachers Association, I think that the unions will push their allies in the Capitol to continue to undermine charter schools. I mean, people need to remember that Governor Jerry Brown was a big supporter of charter schools, and he established charter schools in Oakland when he was mayor. And he was always the backstop who would veto bad anti-charter school bills that are coming out of the legislature. But now we have a situation where there's basically no goalie, and the teacher unions will be taking swipes at the legislative puck with essentially an empty net. And I think that's why this lawsuit that John Adams Academy and the other charter schools have filed is so important. Carlos mentioned putting faces to this terrible situation that's going on with the funding cutoff for charter schools. And, I encourage our listeners to follow Norman and Carlos's advice and read that lawsuit that's on the John Adams Academy website, because I've read through the whole thing, and one of the things you are struck by is the fact that these student plaintiffs have like very sad and compelling stories. I mean, there's a student named Brock who is an 11-year-old part Native American sixth grader who's enrolled at John Adams Academy, and his parents enrolled him there because John Adams offered him and his siblings structure and guidance and safety. And, Brock suffers from anxiety and some other issues, and the effect of perhaps his school eventually closing would really devastate him. So, there are real life impacts to these decisions that the legislature and the governor have made. And I think that what is one of the great things, or one of the hopeful things, is that the lawsuits like this John Adams lawsuit, may act as a disincentive for the legislature and the governor to do further bad things down the road.
So as we close, for Norman and Carlos, what can parents and others who strongly oppose these charter school budget cuts do to try and change things? How can they get involved with what you're doing?
Well, one of the first ways that they can support these actions is to go to our website, go to johnadamsacademy.org, click on the link that says Fund Every Child, and you can see the litigation there. There's also a GoFundMe page where we can get financial support to conduct and keep going with this litigation in the event that we don't get a proper ruling at the lower level and we have to appeal. I mean, those litigation efforts cost money. And so we're looking for support. We're looking for donations to help us do that so that we don't have to spend any resources from our academic program. Obviously all that is being spent on the kids. We're looking to fund this through donations. So anything that folks can do to support us in that way is very much appreciated. We also have to work and strive and fight every day in a unified way, regardless of your political party, regardless of your ideology. We should all be able to unite around the idea that freedom works and that children and families should be able to choose what's best for each child. And we need to be able to unite around the fact that the state of California needs to provide those financial resources. The state's spending approximately $10,000 per pupil. And under this current funding mechanism, they're denying that to growing schools where children want to go, and they're giving it to schools where children used to be enrolled that are no longer being served. And so they're paying these dollars to schools for phantom children that don't exist, and telling us at the same time that there's not enough money to fund the growth. We need to demand accountability from our elected officials. Those are taxpayer dollars, taxpayer resources. Every one of those dollars should follow the child.
And in closing, I would also say that this is not just a charter school issue. At the heart of this is really a freedom issue. And we have to remember that families have to be empowered to make the best decision, especially educationally, for their family as they need to, whether that be the district school, the charter school, a private school, a distance learning program. We need to empower families. And one of the things, as Norman alluded to, it's difficult if we're trying to save the system as opposed to the souls on the ship. So I would just, again, implore everybody who is listening to really take a look at what are the aims of providing quality education and what kind of freedoms do we want to allow our families, especially in this time of great need, to allow them to make the best decisions that will allow them to prosper and to move forward.
Thanks to our guests, Norman Gonzales, Carlos Yniguez, Lance Izumi, and of course, Tim Anaya. If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, and now iHeartRadio and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Ichon. Hope you'll come back again for next round with PRI.